I didn't know this till I was like 30, but my brother, when he was 6, lost all his friends because my dad had written, I guess, Question of Palestine or Orientalism, and one of the Jewish parents in the class called all the other Jewish parents and said, don't tell your kids not to be friends with him. Oh, they said he was a Nazi. They said my dad was a Nazi or something.
But it's a difficult thing to navigate because like, it's like, you know that what's happening is wrong, and the symbols associated with this particular group of people are also the symbols associated with like bombing Lebanon, right?
Yeah. So that's what happened to me with like, as a kid, I was in Beirut and you see that flag on the tank. You don't. And then I go home and there's a synagogue and it has a Star of David on it. And I'm like, shh.
You know, and it's like a weird feeling. You're like, but you feel like you're doing something wrong by feeling that way.
Exactly. And then I would say like, they're going to kill me, but I can't tell anyone that because I can't say something mean about Jewish people.
To talk about that as an adult is kind of mind blowing, right? So like, I mean, I think back to like my child version of me, or like the child version of you, or the child version of so many Arab American kids who have to deal with those contradictory, confusing feelings, and there's no one to give like any expression to it. And that messes with your head. Hello, everyone. I'm Rania Khalek, and this is Dispatches. Today, I'm joined by Najla Said. She's an actor and writer who's been a powerful voice for Palestine, using storytelling to explore identity, belonging, and what it's like growing up Arab and American in a country that doesn't always make space for that kind of hyphenated identity. She also happens to be the daughter of Edward Said. Yeah, that Edward Said, whose work has reshaped how so many of us think about colonialism, culture, and Palestine. But Najla isn't just carrying on a legacy. She's created her own, speaking with honesty, humor, and heart. What was it like growing up as Edward Said's daughter while trying to fit into a culture that loves Israel and prioritizes the feelings of its supporters over the trauma of those oppressed by Zionism? What's it like to watch the crackdown at Columbia, a place that felt like home to her family for so many years? How does she navigate an entertainment industry that's so often hostile to her identity and politics? And how has the genocide in Gaza reshaped the way she sees the world, this country, and what's possible? We discuss all of that and more. But before we jump into it, this is just part of this episode. The full interview is available to Breakthrough News members only. If you want to support independent media challenging mainstream propaganda, become a Breakthrough News member and access the full episode at patreon.com/Breakthrough News. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode to help us get the word out. Najla, welcome to Dispatches.
Thank you for having me.
It's such a pleasure to have you on, and it's a shame we haven't been able to do this sooner. We have like so much crossover in our social circles.
Absolutely.
And
I
also
read a comment on an interview I did that said that I sounded like you.
Ooh, I hope that's like kind of a compliment. I guess we probably do. I feel like we have a lot in common, and I want to like talk about some of that stuff.
Yes.
So there's so much to get into, but I guess a good place to start would be on some of the more newsy stuff. Obviously, you know, we're in Trump administration number 2, and some of the first most horrifying things that he's doing is targeting immigrants who are here completely legally, by the way, but specifically surrounding those who protested against the genocide in Gaza last year, specifically at Columbia University. Right. And I raised this because, I mean, you basically kind of probably, I assume, grew up a lot around Columbia University, given your family's connection to Columbia University. So and also you grew up in New York City.
Yeah.
So it's a big part of your upbringing. I imagine what's happening there hits quite close to home. So I guess I'm curious, you know, what are your general thoughts on the encampments, the student protests, and the reaction that we've seen from the Columbia administration, including the arrest and attempted deportation of students like Mahmoud Khalil?
Well, I have to say, I'm right now sitting in my childhood bedroom at my mom's house, which is technically on the Columbia campus. Downstairs, there's full 24-hour security. The president of the university moved into this building, so she's downstairs. And there's cops everywhere. The house cleaner walks to a farther away train stop because she's afraid of ICE because there's so many cops around here. The campus is completely closed off, which to me is just, it's, when I was a kid, we used to like take our Nerf balls and our mitts and baseball bats and go to the campus. I thought campus meant playground because that's where we played. And my dad's office was in Hamilton Hall for 30 years. So that whole last spring was overwhelmingly intense because it's literally everything inside of me, Palestine, Colombia, New York. I just felt like the amount of like my brain exploding from all of the incorrect information. I happened to visit the encampments with Motaz Azaiza, who's one of the journalists from Gaza. And all I saw was a bunch of like young people. It was like a commune. No one was doing anything even very loud. They were all talking. They were all reading my dad's book. They had like a screening of a film. It was just like a little happy camp out. And then to come back to like looking on social media and people that I grew up with saying things like, one person was like, I heard the wife of a terrorist was there. And I was like, no, that's my friend's mother, Mrs. El Arian, because her husband is not, for those who don't know, Sami El Arian was a professor of Palestinian origin who was accused by the US government of being a terrorist supporter. And my brother was actually on his legal team. So when this woman's like, I heard there was a wife of a terrorist there. And I said, no, she is not the wife of a terrorist. I actually know her. I just remember that moment being like my head exploding because the media was completely telling the story as if it was like an encampment for anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And totally deleting the idea that they were actually just protesting the war, or whatever you want to call it, or against the genocide in Gaza, which is a completely different thing than just sitting there being anti-Semitic. So last spring was a lot. But this year it felt even worse because in the last week, Colombia capitulated to all of these Trump demands, as we discussed. And having looked at what they're doing, they're going to expand the campus in Tel Aviv, and they're doing all these things to counter what my father and my family have left, which is the Center for Palestine Studies, the Edward Said Chair, which is held by Rashid Khalidi, who my father brought in for that job. As well as we have a lecture series. My dad's collection of his books is in the library at Columbia. So last couple of weeks have felt incredibly overwhelming and upsetting. And I feel like I'm supposed to do something, but I don't know what. Because although my mom is very much involved with CPS and all of the stuff that happens at Columbia, we're not really connected to the university in the same way and don't have the ability to really affect any change. So it's incredibly frustrating. And I feel like one of the things for my dad especially, and also for me, is this idea of not having a home. And within New York City, we lived in like probably the most Zionist neighborhood. So this little enclave of Columbia where it was university people and a little more of a less gentrified neighborhood was really, I think, a home for so much for my dad. It's really the only place he ever lived for any continued period of time. So I think that is it hurts. It hurts.
I can't even imagine. And I mean, the crazy capitulation to have a campus in Tel Aviv. I mean, they were just like going above and beyond and offering things Trump didn't even ask for.
Yeah.
Which is just so insane.
Which is amazing. I told this on my social media, like when my father died, they did a memorial at Columbia, and the new president at the time, Lee Bollinger, who's now gone, told the story of how like his little speech about my dad was that the first time he met my dad, he complimented his tie, and my dad took it off and gave it to him and said it's an Arab custom. And then he proceeded in the next 20 years to like open a campus in Tel Aviv and like give his job to the woman who became the president last year, who called the cops on everyone. So it's all it feels raw and very personal at this point. So yeah.
Yeah, we gotta. That's one of our Achilles' heels, right? As Arabs, we're just too goddamn generous.
So really sad.
No, that is a really sad story.
Yeah.
I wanna ask you a bit about. Well, actually, let me. Well, we're gonna get to your dad in a bit more detail, but
Yeah.
I just kind of wanted to ask you. I mean, you knew him really well. You grew up with him. He was your
Yeah.
father. I imagine he would probably have similar views you do. But how do you think he would feel watching what's happening at Columbia?
I think he'd be enraged. And I mean enraged, like whatever you imagine someone enraged, he would be on the phone, he would be screaming, he would be absolutely infuriated. And I think for him also betrayal was a big thing. So he would feel very betrayed. But I think, I mean, I don't know if you were alive whether we would have gotten to this point. I don't know. I think last year during the encampments, I think he would have tried to communicate with the president,
Yeah.
and somehow talk to her. I mean, I'm sure other people tried. I'm not saying that, he would, but he did have a way of wielding some sort of authority and power over people who were even in a situation where they had power over him. Um, and I think he would have known how to handle the nonsense. I mean, that could be wishful thinking. I don't know. But I think if he were here, he would be infuriated and he would be mobilizing everyone and everything he knows to write about it, talk about it, and get the opposite, the other story out, which,
Yeah.
as we know, is one of the hardest things.
Seriously. Well, we're going to come back to your dad. I want to actually talk a bit about you and your own personal journey, because I find it really compelling, not just because I can relate to it, but also because it's so relatable. And I think for a lot of Arab Americans, it is.
Yeah.
And you've talked a lot, you've written a lot, you've basically wrote a book about struggling with identity growing up and like navigating your family's history, being Palestinian, being Arab. You're also Lebanese, Christian, which I say that very cautiously because
Yeah,
I don't like to talk about sects that way, but I point that out because that is a part of being Arab as well, and
Right.
often it's erased. But also being American. And there's just like a constant contradiction in all of those identities thrown together. So I'm just curious if you can talk a little bit about that journey and how your sense of self has evolved. And again, like I really do relate to that because, I grew up not in New York, but in Virginia to an Arab American family, a Lebanese American family, but also from a minority sect. So I never really fit in anywhere. Like I'm super American, but I'm also quite Lebanese, but I'm also not Muslim. So I don't which is like kind of like, so yeah, it's just like, it's a confusing spot to be in, especially through like the post 9/11 era.
Yeah. So I basically grew up, and it's funny because there's an interview with my dad, with Salman Rushdie on YouTube. And he even says, my daughter pretends she's not Arab. And I was probably 12 at the time. So he was right.
I went through that phase.
Yeah. So I went, when I was a kid, I just didn't really understand, there's one of the funniest parts of my play, I mean, to the audience, is when my solo play, which was called Palestine, which is basically about this. I'm in the car singing Noel, Noel, born as the King of Israel. And my brother hits me and says, you're supposed to say born as the King of occupied Palestine. And so that's like the microcosm of my childhood, was not understanding what was going on and knowing that like when I was 9, we got stuck in Beirut. And so I had been there every summer. So, we would go and then we'd go to the beach where they weren't bombing. So like the war was happening. We were just not, until I was 9 in 1983. And then we literally were stuck. So I knew the Middle East. I knew Arabic. I knew Arabic food. I knew everything about my culture. But for some reason I was petrified because I knew maybe I shouldn't be that. And I didn't know this till I was like 30, but my brother, when he was 6, lost all his friends because my dad had written, I guess, Question of Palestine, Orientalism, and one of the Jewish parents in the class called all the other Jewish parents and said, don't tell your kids not to be friends with him. So we didn't even know that happened until I was like 30. So I think I had picked up the danger somehow, of talking about it. And then to go back to what you were saying about Christian, I went to a very WASP-y school on the Upper East Side that like Jackie O went to. That's sort of to tell you what kind of school it is. And everyone was Episcopalian. And my dad was born in the British Mandate and was Anglican, which is the same thing as Episcopalian. And so I was baptized Episcopalian. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to go with the things that are the same. So I tried to sort of fashion myself into this, like, I'm just like you. And my dad went to Harvard and Princeton, and my mom works in a bank, and I'm normal. I'm normal. And then it just, when I was 13, I think the first intifada started, and my dad was on TV literally every night. And then I couldn't hide it anymore. But at the same time, that's when I started not wanting to hide it anymore, because I don't know, it just occurred to me, like, what did I do? I was just born. But up until that point, I had also not had a lot of contact with Jewish people because I went to this very waspy school. And there were some Jewish girls in my class, but they didn't have bat mitzvahs or anything. They never went to synagogue. They dyed their hair blonde. It was very different. So then when I went to high school, I had finally started being okay with being Palestinian and Lebanese and saying it. And it was just to like reiterate that it was because of the first intifada. I was like so excited and proud of these people that were like throwing stones at tanks, and I was proud to be a part of that. So I went to high school with the ability to name my identity, but maybe not go into it so much. Like if I had the Middle East club at school, we would like make hummus and tabbouleh, and then that was it, you know? And so I did my best. But the first Gulf War also started when I was in high school, and having had been in a war when I was a kid, I started to have, I guess, what would be now known as PTSD reactions. And I felt a huge split from my friends because they thought it was cool to watch them blow up Baghdad. And I thought it was the most horrific thing I could imagine. So long and the short of it, by then I was like in high school, but all my friends in high school were Jewish and pretty Zionist. So I walked this fine line of, everyone, the shtick of my book and my plays, that everyone has always thought I was Jewish because I seem like I'm from this neighborhood and I talk a certain way.
Yeah.
So I kept trying to, I'm saying this in retrospect now, the person who wrote the book would not have said this. My book came out like 10 years ago. So I feel like I was still kind of trying not to be bad and trying to be the good Arab so that my Jewish friends would still like me. And then I went to college during the Oslo years, so there wasn't a lot happening. And then when I graduated, I decided to be an actor. And then 9/11 happened 5 years later, and that changed everything. And then I started working with an Arab American theater company. We started a company, started doing plays about our culture and trying to help people. And that's out of that evolved my solo play. So the long and the short of it is I probably was able to admit that I was Arab when I was 13. High school, I was like okay with it, but still trying to like make Jewish people feel better. And then as an adult, I sort of grew out of that with 9/11 and everything in the post 9/11 years. But I think after October 7th, there's been like another shift in my identity or my sort of interactions and relationship to the people around me in New York and in my neighborhood. And it's very different now. It's not great.
Yeah, no, I want to get to October 7th,
Yeah.
but I just want to comment on some of what you said, because so I was in high school during 9/11, and I can relate to so much of you're saying. I mean, Edward Said was not my father, which adds like a whole nother element to it. Like that's so
you really
insane.
can't hide. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Your
like
dad was on TV last night. Like, oh, great.
I just can't even. And also people, the kinds of things the attacks he endured, the things that people would say about him. And then my God, I mean, even though you didn't know what was happening, to have like the parents of Jewish kids in your class, like or your brother's class, be telling the other parents, make sure your kid doesn't play with this. I mean, it's so insane.
He was a Nazi. They said my dad was a Nazi.
Jesus Christ. So I mean, I did grow up around some Jewish kids who were very nice and their families were nice, but a lot of them were very pro-Israel. And I tried it was hard to navigate that. And God bless my mother. She would like take me to those bat mitzvahs, and they give presents at those bat mitzvahs and bar mitzvahs of like naming trees in Israel, like after you. Right. And it's like, and like my parents knowing what that was, I mean, they tried to their best to instill in me what they could, but also they're not going to tell me not to hang out with people because they're Jewish, right? But it's a difficult thing to navigate because like, it's like, that what happening is wrong, and the symbols associated with this particular group of people are also the symbols associated with like bombing Lebanon, right?
Yeah. So that's what happened to me with like,
yeah.
as a kid, I was in Beirut and you see that flag on the tank. You
Yeah.
don't. And then I go home and there's a synagogue and it has a Star of David on it. And I'm like, shh.
If you have a conscience, it's unbearable to be plugged into the corporate media machine right now. These outlets are accomplices in genocide, running cover for the war machine. Breakthrough has become the go-to outlet for those who want something different. But the funds we've used to start this platform are starting to run out. We'd never dream of turning to mainstream corporate funding. So we're turning to you. Become a patron. For as little as $5 a month, you can become an essential part of our fight to not just break through the mainstream media, but create something that can challenge it. We have to become completely viewer supported, or this platform we've built could go away. Don't just watch us, join us. You know, and it's like a weird feeling. You're like, but you feel like you're doing something wrong by feeling that way.
Exactly. And then I would say like they're going to kill me, but I can't tell anyone that because I can't say something mean about Jewish people. Like it was all so, and then they sent me to therapy, and then I was like, the therapists are all Jewish. I can't talk about things. Like I get nervous. And it was literally like, I'm scared that Jewish people don't like me, which in the last 2 years, I realized they didn't after all. So,
I mean, it's a, like to talk about that as an adult is kind of mind blowing, right? So like, I mean, I think back to like my child version of me, or like the child version of you, or the child version of so many Arab American kids who have to deal with those contradictory, confusing feelings, and there's no one to give like any expression to it. And that messes with your head. That really messes with your head.
The taboo of it is like, you know, I've had jobs where I, you know, had to, like I teach Pilates still, it's part of my identity as well. And I've had to teach people who were in the Israeli army, and then they ask me about my name, and I'll say I'm Lebanese just to kind of not get too into it. And then they want to talk, and then I'll say, I don't feel comfortable teaching this person. And they'll say, we can't do anything about that because it looks anti-Semitic if you don't want to teach this, you know, like, so we don't have, because of all the protection and in the era we grew up in post World War II and the Holocaust, and of course, rightfully so, we don't want to offend people or be anti-Semitic or be racist, but we also should get a chance to say, this is an unfair situation when someone's bullying me because I'm not X, Y, and Z, and then I'm not allowed to say anything because they're a persecuted minority. It's just, it's been really difficult.
It's really it's really twisted. It's really twisted, and it's a psychological mind fuck. I don't usually curse on this show, but I feel like that's worthy of it. It really is, and it's like, and it makes me feel sad because like I have, you know, extended family. I have nephews and nieces, and I see them have to go through the same thing growing up. And it's like, yeah, as a kid to have to go to school and sing holiday songs and then have to sing the Hanukkah song, but also like while Gaza's being bombed, and also see the Star of David and also be confused and then feel bad about yourself and guilty that you don't want to sing the song, but you don't quite understand why. And like, it's not because it's like an anti-Jewish thing, but then it's like, it's all just a...
No, totally. And there's also the part where you're singing those songs and or like in my school, we had to recite Bible verses every day. And it's my religion, and they're talking about Bethlehem and Jerusalem and Jericho. And I'm like, this is where I'm from, but this is for the white people. And I don't, you know, I mean, it is my religion, but like, I don't understand how it's a lot. It's a lot.
Well, it's interesting though that you kind of put it into these sort of eras. So you talk about like high school, Gulf War, First Intifada, Gulf War. Then you get to 9/11, which is like a whole other thing, and that sort of launches your off-Broadway show and all these and all this like being involved in Arab American theater. And then we get to, and I'm fast forwarding here, but to October 7th, which I think was transformative for a lot of us in different ways, no matter where we were before that. But I think all of us are in a different space now, and sort of how we view not just this particular like settler colonial issue of Palestine, but also the world. So I'm just curious if you can talk a little bit about that. Has anything shifted for you in terms of how you view this country, the world, or even your own work?
Well, it's all shifted. And what's interesting to me is my parents always used to talk about 1967 because they were both in America. My mom had just moved here. And she remembers that there were Israeli flags all down Fifth Avenue, all the way to, all the way downtown from uptown. And she and her cousin got in a cab and were speaking Arabic. And the driver said, don't speak that language right now. And everyone in New York was saying, we won, we won. So for both of my parents, that was a huge turning point. And for my dad specifically, I think that's when he became politically involved with Palestine. So I think for our generation, this has been that moment, which is beyond 9/11, because 9/11 was also generalized Muslims, and it was it was a very generic thing, and this is very specific. And it has exposed so much. So like I said, I teach Pilates. It's my other job. It's something I love and have done for over 20 years. And I have a small group of clients that are mine. And I had been teaching this woman for 7 years, 3 times a week. I bent over backwards for her, like literally and figuratively. And I'd even given her my book because I knew she was modern Orthodox Jewish. And she was like obsessed with me. And then the morning after October 7th, I had woken up and seen on my feed on, I don't know if it was Instagram, probably, Israeli flag after Israeli flag after Israeli flag after Israeli flag. And I had what you and I talked about was a reaction to that flag, which no one will ever understand what that is for us. It's terrifying. So I wrote sort of categorically on I think it was on both Instagram and Facebook, like, if you posted an Israeli flag, I'm going to delete you.
I love it.
Because I thought it was like with the Ukraine thing, suddenly everyone just posted a Ukrainian flag without knowing anything. And I thought, okay, and it's also like Indigenous Peoples Day weekend, and you just change your profile pic from a Ukrainian flag to an Israeli flag. And I just want everyone to scream. Like,
Yeah.
just terrifying. It's all wrong. Yeah. So I was like, just please delete yourself or something. And then I was like, I'm really done with Zionism. And somebody screenshot it in my neighborhood, I guess, and shared it. I don't know what happened. My client saw it and then sent me an email that said, I never want to see you again. And signed it with Israeli flag, Israeli flag, Israeli flag, Israeli flag. And I was like,
oh my God.
Okay. And then I freaked out because I was like, I shouldn't have posted anything. My friends from high school who are Jewish were like, one of them was like, well, we understand, we know you, but it's a little too soon. And I was like, sorry, my mouth. Too soon. Like, too soon? Like, you have no idea. And then I had also posted something like explaining what Hamas was. And that was terrible. So so I happened to go to Brazil on October 8th. And so that morning I woke up, saw all these Israeli flags, then packed, left, got to Brazil. And by the time I got there were like all these people who hated me and never wanted to speak to me again. Wow. And you know what? It was absolutely fine because everything they said to me to justify was racist. The woman who didn't want me to teach her anymore said, well, there was extra security at the synagogue today and I'm just worried. And I was like, so your response to fear of racism is to be racist. That makes a lot of sense. And then my other friend was like, he said, you're a faker, you're a fake humanist, you don't care about people, like just on and on. But it was as if everyone who knew me, because I was the only Palestinian they knew, they had to call me and yell at me about Hamas. So everything that I ever said or did or stood for suddenly was a lie because I didn't say the right thing or do the right thing. And my reaction was not allowed to happen. And I think if people knew what our reaction to that day really was like, obviously individuals have different reactions, but I think for us, there was a level of the first thought we had was, oh no.
Yeah. Most people, I think, were like, oh no, because we knew Gaza was about to be just completely like demolished. Yeah.
And so we're all responding from that brain. And they're all responding like, stop and worry and, care about it. It was. And then I realized, and it's been months and months, one person after another, I didn't realize was just like, I told the story somewhere else. A neighbor of mine was standing in my doorway and she saw the keffiyeh hanging and she asked me to move it because it offended her. And I was like, no, goodbye. So yeah, it's been,
Wow.
so I've got my grips on a really small group of people that I trust now. And it was small before. So,
but gotta make that circle as small as possible in these times.
Right. And also as you age, you're like, I don't have time for people who would rather me be dead. I just don't, like, what is that about?
I think this was a really eye-opening moment because for a lot of people, and including me, because it made us realize that the way that people have dehumanized Palestinians extends to all of us, even here.
Yeah.
And not that it makes it okay to just be Palestinians in Palestine, but it's like, oh, like you start to recognize when it comes to Zionists, like if you happened to be in the West Bank and got shot and killed, they'd be like, well, she must have been doing something to deserve it.
Exactly. What did you do? Yeah. You must have something.
Like that's where it's like, oh my God. And I think also, I used to really shy away from equating Israel with Nazi Germany because of the, way that comes off and it offends people. And I want to be sensitive because of the Holocaust. I don't give a shit anymore. You know why? Because they are like Nazi Germany. Like,
I think that's it. It's like, I spent my whole life making sure not to hurt my friends' feelings because they're Jewish. And no one has ever like, did they ever even think that just saying I went to Israel or I'm going to Israel is hurtful and offensive to us? Mm-hmm. I can't really go there. Not that I want to go to Israel, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So like, I can't do these things and I can't just talk about it like that. And you're talking about my family's biggest trauma casually. I went to Israel this summer. It's not, no one's ever thought about my feelings. And now I'm sort of done with that. I'm like, I don't care about your feelings, especially when these people have no actual connection to Israel except being Zionists. Their families came from Europe to America. And to be lectured constantly by someone whose family is from like Texas and before that Germany,
right,
about the country that like I'm from, where my father was born, is just it's mind blowing, and it's just no, I have no time for that anymore.
Yeah. And also, I'm just kind of like, it's been a year and a half. And if you are still making excuses for like what is undeniably just the most horrific thing we've seen in our lifetimes ever, then like, you're just, I don't know what to tell you, but you have a humanity problem. Like you've lost a piece of your humanity and there's no coming back from that. And I just don't want to be connected to anybody.
No, there was a person from my high school who wrote that I was a sociopath because of something. And this was 12 months in. And I was like, with all due respect, which literally means nothing, honestly, you are the sociopath. If you have any defense of Israel at this point, you are a sociopath. And also I said, it's good to know, because this is someone from high school, that you never actually liked me because I'm Palestinian. And he said, on the contrary, I always thought you were wonderful and funny and blah, blah, blah. And I'm just listening to this person who is in the LGBTQ community, who was bullied in high school for that, literally calling me a psychopath for posting something that contradicted his view of beheaded babies or whatever, 12 months into this nightmare. So it still hurts because it's high school people. I think that makes it a little more psychologically just like upsetting, but it also, it's like, it's really sad, and you really are going to look awful in retrospect.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do to like defend any of this anymore.
Well, I want to ask you about, I want to talk a little bit about your father, and I want to talk about it in a very respectful way, because I'm sure that not sure, we talked about it before, like a lot of people kind of reduce you to just being, you're the daughter of Edward Said. And that must be quite the shadow to grow up in, because he's just this like legendary, enormous figure and this like towering intellectual, and his work has shaped how really generations understand power, culture, Palestine, the region. I mean, Orientalism, watching the last year and a half, it's been interesting to see I see people post screenshots from your dad's books. And it still all applies. It still all resonates.
Terrifying. So, I mean, it's good because then we get royalties because people still don't get it. They still buy the books. but it's also terrifying that like books that were written 50 years ago are still not even like, he wrote a book called Covering Islam in 1978 or 90 and 79 or 80, or I don't know. And they still haven't figured out how to cover
Yeah,
the
it could
journey.
have been written today because it's like
Yeah,
nothing's shifted, but
yeah,
it's like that just speaks to the power of his work that it
yeah.
is all still resonating today. But, I'm curious if you could maybe talk a bit about what it's like to live in that legacy as the daughter of like this art, this public figure, but all who's like kind of reduced to it, but also you in your own right have done so much, have accomplished so much.
Yeah.
Which by the way, I think the Pilates thing is awesome. You must be in like an amazing shape. I'm like a huge workout nut. So like I always
Oh,
respect
you are?
that
Oh,
so
thank you.
much.
Well, that's also part of like it helped me kind of grow into myself a little. When I was younger, I write about this in the book and the play. Otherwise, I wouldn't just randomly bring it up. But I was severely anorexic, and I wanted to partly related to being Palestinian, wanting to disappear, but also wanting people to like notice that I was there and in pain. And it very much helped me connect my mind and body, and helped me a lot with all of this stuff in getting comfortable with myself, because a lot of my anorexia and all that stuff was an alienation from my identity and my body, um, and also wanting a body like a white girl, which is a whole other story we could talk about at another time.
Yeah.
But,
Well, yeah. No, that's no. I mean, I can imagine it's also a control mechanism.
yeah,
As
exactly.
something you can control.
Yes, exactly.
But
So,
yeah,
yeah.
go ahead. No, please continue.
So I was just going to talk about, but my,
Yeah.
So my dad. Oh, you were asking. Were you done with
Well,
your
I
question?
guess I just wanted you to like kind of talk about like, and I think this is what you were going to go into is like how you just navigated and still navigate both the kind of like privilege, but also
Yeah,
pressure of being Edward Said's daughter.
yeah. So I mean, obviously, being anorexic is a very like, if you know anything about that eating disorder, like overachiever parents really, my parents didn't put a lot of pressure on me, but it was very clear. Everyone in my family has a PhD. All of them. I don't. I have a BA.
But you did go to like Princeton. I just want to throw that out there. Like you're very highly
I think
educated
that
and
it
successful.
expires after a certain point. Like, but so I. By the way, the Arab Society of Princeton, when I was there, was me, my brother, my cousin Usama Makdisi, and Ali Abu Nima,
Oh
which is like
wow.
hilarious because all we did was like make T-shirts. But
So
now,
I have to get your brother on my show and then I'll have had the entire like
yeah, there you go.
OG Princeton Air
There you go.
Society
There you go.
on
Which
dispatches.
is funny because we literally did nothing. We like made a T-shirt, but Ali was the president, and of course he was. But he was hilarious. But so yeah. So growing up, being this person's daughter, it was always, you always felt his specialness when he was alive. Like even walking down the street, people would stare at him and be like, "Who are you? I know you." And he'd be like, "I'm not that guy." And he was really funny about it. Um, but especially at Palestinian events, Palestinian protests, always having the privilege, of course, of driving to the protest, watching my dad give a speech, and then leaving the protest as opposed to like marching. But there was certainly, my mom and I went to protests all the time when I was a kid. So there's a reverence that I understand, and I have reverence for my father in that respect, in the way that people see him. It can be overwhelming when he died. Everyone was like, he was all of our father, and that's a lot to deal with. And in a certain way, it opens doors for me. I probably have like super good wasta in the lefty community. I don't know if that's like a thing, but
I
like
think it is, but you
I
well
have
deserved.
I'm like a nepo baby in like the lefty world, but I don't think anywhere else they really, or maybe in the Palestinian community. But yeah, I think when he died, I didn't know how I was supposed to be his daughter, because people started interviewing me about his work, and I was like, I don't do that. I'm an artist. So what I tried to do with my own work, with my own medium, which was theater, which I had studied and been acting since I was like 5 or 6 years old, was to try to take his ideas and make them a little more accessible. And through my story, and it was more American. It was less highbrow, and also I wanted to take people on this journey with me because it's such an overwhelmingly um, like it's just an overwhelming topic in general, and people. So I, in my story, was telling the story like, look, I'm this person's daughter and I didn't get it either. And look how stupid I was. And look how I figured it out. Maybe if you come along with me on this journey, you'll figure it out too. So I definitely used him being my dad to sort of take the opportunity to write this play. And also I'd been stuck in war twice, and had grown up in this way where literally I go to this Yemeni smoke shop in my neighborhood and they're like, you're Jewish, you're Jewish. And I'm like, no. And I speak Arabic to them. And they're like, no, you're Jewish. So this idea that everyone has that I'm this Jewish girl from the Upper West Side. And sort of told the story that way. And through it, I've gotten some incredible opportunities and such. But I, being an actor, I wrote the play to get more acting work for myself. And what I got was a book contract to write a memoir, which is a wonderful thing. But like, it did not open doors for me in that way. Even though it was sold out off Broadway, like no other theater did it. So I've mostly made money doing it at colleges all over the country, which has been interesting because I started in like 2008 or 9, and to see how college campuses have changed, going from like only Arab students inviting you to like the head of the SJP having a yarmulke on, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So it's been great in that regard. But, I think another thing we were never allowed to talk about was Hollywood. And I'm fully aware and have been fully aware that I'm not as successful as I might be, partly because of whatever, luck and all of that. But having had the connections I had through my dad and the world that I grew up in, I've always been like, it's really interesting that I can't seem to get a job ever. And the plays, and I mostly do theater, but the film and TV I do, it's not, there's nothing, I mean, it's generally like playing a woman with a hijab. Because that's what they were doing.
The typecast is real. That typecasting is real.
And, it's extremely frustrating. And I do get to, the way they do casting now, or maybe not anymore, I don't know, because Trump's changing everything, was, it's like submit all ethnicities. So it's like all ethnicities, all genders, all of that. So I'm auditioning with like a black, gay, trans, anything that's not white is kind of lumped into one thing. And sometimes they'll be like, must be Middle Eastern, must speak Arabic, must, and then even then I'm not quite right for it. So what I think has been most interesting is sort of navigating a career that is, whether I'm Palestinian or not, my dad was this person. So I could never hide any of it, and I don't want to. So it's been interesting. I feel a little vindicated lately, knowing how obvious it is that Hollywood has a certain
so Zionist.
Yes.
So Zionist. And there's also, look, one of my very close
to be that successful, and probably will always be a Pilates teacher. But
I love that though. I love that you get to be a Pilates teacher and like make a like career out of that, because it's wonderful. I have my very, very close friend. Her brother is an actor. And he's also, he's Lebanese. So, or of Lebanese background, ethnicity. And like the typecasting he has to deal with is very real. And on top of that, it's like, there's a lot of Israeli produced and directed shows, across Hollywood, a lot, especially when there's Middle Easterners involved.
Yeah.
By the way,
there's I auditioned for an episode of Law and Order. There's one of the like ADAs on that show now is played by an Israeli actress, and her character is supposed to be Lebanese. And I auditioned there was some plot with a Lebanese maid or something, and I didn't book it, which is fine. But it said like, you must speak Lebanese Arabic. And I'm like, the actress who plays the role is Israeli. Like, no one asked her to speak perfect Lebanese dialect. Like, I just don't. So it makes me nervous. a lot of that stuff because, yeah, I mean, even when I did an episode of NCIS New Orleans, the costume guy got me, I was supposed to be Muslim, so he got me like a regular colorful scarf and just a long sleeve t-shirt and jeans. And he's like, you don't know how hard I had to fight for this. They wanted you in a whole black thing with that. And I'm
Oh
like,
God.
I don't even know why this woman wears a hijab in the first place. There's no indication. Like that's what I always ask. Why is this character wearing a hijab? And they're always like, what? And I'm like, why? Is she devout? What's her family? Like, and they get so confused. And I'm like, it's just because I know you did it because it's an indicator. And I need to know why. Like, and they get so confused. It's not that I'm against hijabs. It's just that I don't understand what it has to do with the character. If it doesn't tell the story in a specific way, there's no point. So, you try to do things like that and you take them aback because they really don't always care. Yeah.
Yeah. That actually is like a perfect segue into the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is the religious angle of things. I mentioned earlier that you and I both come from minority Arab backgrounds. My family's Lebanese Druze. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear the rest, you can access it by becoming a Breakthrough News member at patreon.com/breakthrough news.